Chapter 100. 6th Year. Boundaries.
Hey, hey, mama said the way you move gonna make you sweat, gonna make you groove. Ah, the way you shake that thing gonna make you burn, gonna make you stay. Hey, baby, when you walk that way, watch honey drip, can't keep away.
Friday, 12th November, 1976. It was not the first time Professor McGonagall had shouted at him in her nightgown, and this time Sirius was at least not being eaten alive by his own guilt. He had no regrets about trying to cover the Slytherins and pus. Still, it wasn't exactly a pleasant experience, especially not with Remus standing at his side, staring contritely at the floor. James and Peter had both escaped, of course. It seemed that all of Potter's morning jogs had paid off, and he'd actually managed to outrun the old caretaker and his vile cat. Of course, Filch had been distracted by the explosion in the bathroom, which had also helped James to evade notice. He felt horrible about it, and offered repeatedly to tell McGonagall that the whole thing had been his idea. But Sirius wasn't having it. There was no need for James to be punished when he had been quick enough to get away. Besides, it wasn't as if he and Remus couldn't handle a bit of detention, although the task McGonagall had assigned them was rather ghastly. "You both have an hour free before lunch tomorrow," she said, scowling. "I expect both of you to report to the dungeons in order to clean up your mess, without magic." No, it wasn't James that Sirius was mad at. But when he returned to their dorm and saw Peter already in his pajamas and sitting on the end of his bed, he had to stifle a wave of rage. He couldn't believe the slippery little git had just left them there. Did he have no code of honor? At least the prank was not entirely ruined. Filch hadn't found any of the hidden mushrooms, and the next morning the Booba Tuba Puffball crossbreeds exploded just as the Slytherins were leaving the dungeons for breakfast. Sirius felt an immense wave of satisfaction when he later learned that both Snape and his darling brother had been in the wave of students heading to the Great Hall, and only wished that he'd gotten the opportunity to see Reggie covered head to toe in Booba Tuba pus. Of course, their professors knew immediately who the culprits were. McGonagall pulled Sirius and Remus back into her office at once, reprimanding them thoroughly for a second time and subtracting 20 more house points from Gryffindor. Sirius very much doubted that they would be winning the House Cup that year, but he wasn't all that fussed either way. She also tacked on an extra night of detention, which started James up again. "I'll tell her it was my idea. I was the one who brought the mushrooms into the castle." "Oh, shut it, Potter," Sirius groaned, reaching for a goblet of pumpkin juice. "We can't have you throwing away all your hard work to build up your sword reputation. What would Evans think?" Peter, of course, did not offer to turn himself in, only shoveled eggs obliviously into his mouth. Sirius shot him a nasty look, but he seemed too preoccupied with his breakfast to notice. Sirius was still irritated that afternoon when he and Remus made their way down to the dungeons. He fumed as they stood outside the pus-filled bathroom, waiting for Filch to stop by with the cleaning supplies. "Bloody Wormtail, this is all his fault." "No, it isn't," Remus said bluntly, yawning and leaning back against the wall to wait. "The little twerp ran away like the vermin he is." "Hey, be nice," Moony scolded. "He only did that because someone got overexcited and blew up all the mushrooms." Sirius flushed. Remus wasn't actually suggesting that it was his fault, was he? "I was thinking on my feet." "You weren't thinking at all." "Well, you weren't doing anything." "I was trying to hide it. If we'd hidden the box and got under the cloak, no one would have got in trouble at all." "Well, you didn't say that at the time." Sirius scowled resentfully. "You didn't give me a chance." Sirius folded his arms stubbornly, leaning against the wall across from Remus. He still didn't have to run away. Remus scowled right back, snapping, "James ran away too. Don't see you cursing his name." Sirius glared daggers at him, feeling frustrated and hot and twice as angry as he'd been when they first walked down to the dungeons. James running away was different. He hadn't already been trapped in the bathroom with them, abandoning them to certain discovery like a proper coward. Plus, James had offered to turn himself in, to bear some of the burden of punishment. Never mind that Sirius had refused him, what mattered was the principle of the thing. Peter hadn't even offered, and if he had turned himself in, then they'd have had 3 people to clean this ridiculous mess, and Sirius wouldn't be stuck alone with Remus and... Well, it was just different. But clearly, Moony didn't understand that. Filch beamed with vindictive delight as he shoved mops and scrubbing brushes into their hands, dropping 2 large wooden buckets at their feet. Inside the bathroom, the pus had dried into a disgusting, sickly yellow crust that covered every surface it had hit, the walls, the floor, the mirrors. "I'll be back to check on you in 2 hours," Filch said, still smiling sadistically. "You ought to be done by then. No ons, and no funny business." He left with a spring in his step, looking so pleased that Sirius was surprised he didn't start humming. Remus turned to him, and Sirius straightened, frustration still a burning ember in his stomach. "I'll start over there," he said brusquely, jerking his chin towards the far end of the bathroom. "You go over there." He gestured to the opposite side. "Fine," Remus muttered, rolling his eyes as he slouched over to the sink and began to fill his bucket. Sirius's heart clenched with stifled anger. He turned his back on Remus the moment he'd filled his own bucket, feeling scattered and prickly, like he could shout or kick something. Instead, he channeled his energy into scrubbing booba-tuba pus off the tile, gripping his scrub brush in a white-knuckled fist and gritting his teeth as he mercilessly scored his section of the bathroom. Despite the daunting appearance of the thick crust, the pus came off easily with a bit of warm water and soap, and it was surprisingly satisfying to watch the tile reappear from under the yellowy paste. If he was alone, Sirius thought he might have even found the work mildly therapeutic. But he wasn't alone. Although they worked in silence and at opposite ends of the room, Sirius was very aware of Remus's presence, the way one might be aware of the heat emanating from a fireplace. He was acutely attuned to the quiet sounds of Remus moving, footsteps against tile, and the slosh of water as he refilled his bucket in the sink. It was the first time they had been alone since Halloween. It was very cold in the dungeons. Sirius knew that. But he still felt like he was standing next to an open flame. It took an hour for them to clear away the pus, so that the only thing left to do was a final rinse of the sudsy bathroom. Remus moved to the sink, washing out his bucket. He splashed water over his face and neck, cheeks pink with the exertion of vigorous scrubbing. Sirius watched a drop of water run down the line of his jaw. "Nearly finished," Remus said lightly, and when he joined him at the sink to wash out his own bucket, Sirius snorted, scowling. "No thanks to Wormtail." "Shut up about Wormtail, will you?" Remus snapped, frowning. "Grow up!" Sirius didn't bother to respond, heat creeping up the back of his neck. He splashed water in his face too, trying to cool down. After a moment, Remus stomped back over to his wall, washing the suds away with clean water. Sirius found himself drifting closer, as if magnetized. He tried not to stare at the firm line of Moony's shoulders, shifting and flexing under his thin school shirt as he stretched to reach the higher parts of the wall. That frustrated heat still coiled tightly in his stomach. "You missed a bit," he grunted, pushing the taller boy out of the way and leaning past him to swipe a patch of suds off the wall. Remus glared at him, bristling. "Thought we were sticking to our own sides." "Yeah, thought you could be trusted to do a decent job." "If I didn't have you breathing down my neck the whole time." "You're so sensitive," Sirius huffed. "Nah, you're just acting like a prick." Remus shoved an elbow into his side, a sharp shock of momentary pain. Sirius didn't think, just moved, shoving him against the wall, skin hot under the fabric of his shirt. Remus lost his balance and reached out, gripping Sirius's shoulder to keep from stumbling. His fingers were long, rough, bruising, and then Moony was pushing him back, palms against his chest, voice thick with frustration as he said, "Wanker!" Sirius kissed him. It felt more like falling than kissing. Inevitable, the implacable downward pull of gravity, the heady euphoria of crashing and burning. Remus's mouth was hot, his breath was hot, his hands twisting in the cloth of Sirius's shirt were hot. He was on fire, and Sirius never wanted to stop.
Toujours pure!
Sirius ripped himself away, stumbling back as reality flooded back in. Oh, Merlin, he thought, horrified. Oh, buckery fuck, I've gone and done it again. I can't. He won't. He'll... Remus, he choked out. I'm sorry. I don't know what keeps happening to me. It's okay, Remus mumbled, staring at the ground like he couldn't even stomach the thought of looking at him. Tainted, disgusting, depraved. His mother's words echoed in his head, and Sirius felt as if everything he had worked so hard to preserve was crumbling around him. He had to fix this before he ruined everything, before he drove Moony away permanently. You know I'm not a... Yeah, Remus interrupted him. Yeah, course. Me neither. Sirius's heart twisted in his chest. Of course, he wanted to say. Of course you're not. There was nothing wrong with Remus. Remus was perfect. Lips shiny with spit, hair tousled, shirt rumpled deliciously from where Sirius's hands had... Stop it! He thought furiously. Just stop. His mind was a tangle of guilt and heat and fear and wanting. And this was all his fault. He was the one who kept making Remus, who kept losing control and who kept... His thoughts were interrupted by a gentle tug on the hem of his shirt. Remus had caught him, drawing his attention, staring into his eyes. No one's going to find out, he mumbled softly. His eyes were dark with pupil, wide and cautious and beautiful. I could drown in you, Sirius thought feverishly. You won't say anything? Remus shook his head, and Sirius found himself moving closer, knowing he should stop, knowing it was wrong, even as Remus said, I won't. We don't have to stop. Unless you want to. A stronger man might have resisted. A stronger man might have turned away, might have left Remus alone, might have resisted the urge to drag the boy in front of him down into the yawning cavern of his own selfish desire. But Sirius was weak. He was so weak, and Remus was right there, solid and warm and so achingly lovely that he thought he might combust if he didn't touch him right now. And then they were kissing, gasping into each other's mouths, and he could feel Remus hard against his hip, firm and hot and just as desperate as he was. Their hands were on each other, twisting in hair, running over shoulders, ripping at belt buckles until they were pressed together, hands wrapped around each other, panting into each other's necks. When it was over, Sirius stood with his forehead pressed against Moony's shoulder, trying to remember how to breathe. Eventually he pulled back, heart pounding as their eyes met. Remus reached out, skimming fingers across his temple, brushing a strand of hair out of his eyes, and the touch was so gentle that Sirius thought he might break. You're lovely, he whispered, because it was true, and because he couldn't bear to keep the words locked inside his chest. Remus smiled, soft and private, and Sirius was nearly overwhelmed with the urge to kiss him again. Come on. He turned away, buttoning his trousers. We'd better finish this cleaning. He felt cold as he washed his hands, cold as he picked up his mop, cold as he moved back to his own side of the room. Thoughts clamored in his mind, a rising tide that threatened to swell and overtake him. You're not... Remus spoke suddenly, hesitated, then said, Don't run off this time. Sirius turned to look back at him, trying to swallow his heart. I'm not going anywhere, Moony, he promised quietly. Oh, okay. Good then. I felt bad about that, last time. Sorry. He tapped his fingers anxiously against the mop handle in his hands. But I thought you'd be angry or something. I don't know. No, I wasn't. We're still friends, aren't we? Sirius held his breath as he asked it. He needed this. He needed Remus to tell him that he could take this, could have this, without destroying what they already had. It was selfish, but that didn't make him want it any less. Of course, Remus said earnest, solemn and wide-eyed, and far too good to be anything that Sirius deserved. We'll always be friends, Padfoot. Sirius took a breath. Always. He smiled shyly and turned back to cleaning, feeling guilty and relieved, and so happy that it hurt.